The command bunker of Station Raptor tasted of recycled oxygen and burnt coffee. 11,000 feet up in the Colorado Rockies, 12 men occupied the space like planets in careful orbit. They moved with the heavy certainty of men accustomed to physical solutions, their voices calibrated for parade grounds. At the center stood the holographic tactical table, a three-dimensional display of data streams and threat assessments that pulsed with cold blue light. Around it, the senior staff had gathered for the morning briefing. Their faces were hard-weathered by altitude and duty. These were men who had seen combat, who had made decisions under fire, who measured their worth in scars and service records. Colonel James Kessler dominated the room the way a storm dominates the sky. 58, built like granite, his voice carried the resonance of authority. He paced before the holographic display booths, striking steel with sharp rhythmic reports. "Satellite grid is green across all sectors," he announced, his voice filling every corner of the bunker. "Communications relay is operating at peak efficiency. Reactor output is steady. Defensive systems are primed and ready." He paused, surveying his audience with the satisfaction of a general reviewing conquered territory. "This station is a finely tuned instrument, gentlemen, and every man here plays his part with precision." The officers nodded their agreement, automatic and expected. They had heard variations of this speech 100 times. It was ritual reassurance, the daily affirmation that their world was ordered and their commander was in control. In the corner away from Kessler's presence sat a disruption. She was listed simply as analyst. Her gray jumpsuit carried no rank, no insignia. She seemed like ancillary equipment whose presence required no acknowledgement. But Master Sergeant Frank Gallagher saw what others missed. He always had. 68 years old, with a face mapped by 4 decades of service and silver hair. Cut to regulation length, Gallagher stood near the rear of the assembly. His posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of a man who had survived Delta Force operations by learning to observe without being observed. Master Sergeant Gallagher watched her with professional attention. She never wasted movement. Her fingers moved with surgical precision across the keyboard. She was profoundly still, the coiled stillness of a predator. Her eyes were remarkable, the color of a winter sea, gray-blue and depthless. They missed nothing. They swept across the cascading data on her console, parsing information at a speed that seemed almost inhuman. Then they would shift, tracking the subtle dynamics of the room, the tightening of a jaw, the flicker of doubt in an NCO's eyes, the way tension gathered in shoulders when Kessler's voice took on a certain edge. She was reading the room the way others read tactical displays, processing human data alongside digital information, building a complete picture from fragments that others dismissed as irrelevant. Gallagher had seen that kind of focus before, once, 20 years ago, in a different station under different circumstances, a civilian consultant who had moved through a crisis with the same supernatural calm, who had seen patterns in chaos that had saved Gallagher's entire team from an ambush no one else had predicted. The memory was sharp and painful. Dr. Marcus Brennan, a legend in the signals intelligence community, a man who could read the electromagnetic spectrum the way poets read meter. And this woman, sitting silent and separate in the corner of Kessler's kingdom, had the same eyes, the same economy of movement, the same quality of focused intensity. Gallagher had made inquiries, discreet, careful inquiries, the kind that didn't trigger security flags or raise questions. What he'd learned had confirmed his suspicion and deepened his concern. Her name was Dr. Sarah Brennan, 35 years old, PhD in systems engineering from MIT. 12 years of classified operations that left gaps in her service record big enough to hide entire careers. And a designation he'd never encountered before, Protocol Zero authority. When he'd tried to research what that meant, he'd hit walls, not the soft walls of insufficient clearance, but the hard walls of information that existed in a classification tier he hadn't known was possible. All he'd found was a single line in a restricted database: Emergency Contingency Authority for Critical Infrastructure Protection in Scenarios Exceeding Standard Command Parameters, which told him exactly nothing and everything at once. This woman sitting quiet as a ghost in the corner had authority that somehow superseded normal command structure. And Colonel James Kessler, who measured his worth in the weight of his voice and the stars he expected to wear someday, had no idea what was about to unfold. Kessler's voice cut through Gallagher's thoughts. "Sergeant status on personnel rotation. All positions fully manned, sir." Gallagher replied, his voice the gravelly rumble of a man who'd spent too many years breathing dust and gunpowder. "No issues to report." "Good." Kessler's gaze swept the room, and then inevitably it landed on the corner, on her. His expression shifted, irritation flickering across his features like summer lightning. "Who the hell is that?" The question was not curious. It was accusatory, the tone of a man who believed he should know everything that happened in his domain, who viewed the unknown as a personal affront. "New analyst, sir," Gallagher said carefully. "Arrived 72 hours ago. Protocol 0 designation." Kessler's eyes narrowed. "Protocol what?" "0, sir. That's all the manifest said." "Well, she's been sitting in that corner for 3 days doing God knows what. This is a combat readiness station, not a research library." Kessler's voice carried across the room, ensuring everyone heard his displeasure. "I want to know what every person on this mountain is doing and why they're doing it. Clear?" "Yes, sir." But Kessler wasn't finished. His attention remained fixed on Sarah Brennan, and in that moment Gallagher recognized the look. It was the look of a predator who'd identified what he perceived as weakness. A target of opportunity. A chance to reassert dominance through public demonstration. The morning briefing continued, but the energy had shifted. Everyone in the room felt it. Lieutenant Eric Holstrom, a 26-year-old engineer with precise Scandinavian features and the kind of technical brilliance that made him simultaneously invaluable and suspect in Kessler's eyes, shifted his weight uncomfortably. Chief Engineer Vincent Calloway, 45 years old with red hair going gray, and the perpetually worried expression of a man responsible for keeping a nuclear reactor stable at high altitude, found reasons to study his tablet rather than meet anyone's eyes. They all knew what was coming. They'd seen this play before. 3 days later, during the morning briefing, Kessler made his move. The timing was deliberate. Maximum audience, maximum impact. A lesson delivered in front of the assembled staff, a reminder of who held power and who existed at his sufferance. Sarah Brennan sat at her console as she had every morning. 6 screens, active data flowing in streams of numbers and graphs that meant nothing to most of the men in the room. Her posture was perfect, her focus complete. She had not spoken a word since her arrival. Not in briefings, not in the mess hall, not in the corridors. She existed in a bubble of absolute professional silence, which made her the perfect target. "You!" Kessler's voice boomed across the command center. The single syllable was an accusation, a summons, a challenge. "Analyst, stand up." The room went silent. All eyes turned to the corner. Sarah Brennan's head lifted slowly. Her gaze met Kessler's without fear, without deference, without any of the automatic submission that junior personnel typically displayed when addressed by a colonel. It was a look of pure clinical assessment, as if she were examining a specimen under controlled conditions. She stood. The movement was fluid, economical, precise. She was 5'8", athletic without being bulky. Her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun that revealed a face of sharp angles and quiet intensity. Her blue-gray eyes held Kessler's without blinking. 3 days you've sat there, Kessler said, his voice pitched for the room. Staring at your screens, silent as a ghost, taking up space, consuming resources, contributing nothing I can see. He took a step toward her, his physical presence a weapon he wielded with practiced skill. This is a combat readiness station, not a library, not a university research lab. Every man on this mountain has a purpose. They pull their weight. They contribute to the mission. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air that she was not pulling her weight, that her presence was questionable, that her silence was evidence of irrelevance. So I'll ask you directly. Kessler continued, his voice dropping into a register of false reasonableness that was more threatening than his parade ground bellow. What exactly is your function here? What is it you do? Sarah Brennan's expression did not change. Her voice, when it came, was low and crystalline clear. It cut through the heavy air of the bunker like a shard of ice. I monitor for systemic anomalies, sir. And the answer was precise, technical, and utterly unsatisfying to a man who measured value in visible action and quantifiable outputs. Kessler threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound calculated to humiliate. He turned to his audience, inviting them to share in the absurdity. Several officers managed weak smiles, more from discomfort than genuine amusement. Systemic anomalies. Kessler repeated, his tone mocking. Gentlemen, do you hear this? We have engineers for that. We have technicians, men with tools in their hands, men who fix things, men who get things done. He turned back to Sarah, his face now inches from hers, invading her space with the casual aggression of a man who had never been challenged. I don't know who you are or what desk jockey sent you up here with your fancy degrees and your silent treatment. But this is my station, my command. Everyone here answers to me, every single person. The smell of stale coffee and self-regard washed over her. But her expression didn't change. Her eyes remained steady, holding his gaze with a composure that was beginning to unsettle him, though he would never admit it. Who's your commanding officer? Kessler demanded. The question was designed to put her in her place, to force her to name some distant department, some bureaucratic entity he could then dismiss as irrelevant to the real work of maintaining station readiness. He expected her to falter. He expected her to name some colonel at the Pentagon, some program manager in a satellite office, someone whose authority was distant and therefore dismissible. She did not falter. A small, almost imperceptible change occurred in her expression. It was not a smile of amusement or defiance. It was something far more clinical and final. It was the barest hint of a surgeon's expression when identifying the precise point of incision. The moment before the blade breaks skin. The instant when theoretical diagnosis becomes physical intervention. "You're speaking to her, sir," she said. The words were not defiant. They were not triumphant. They were a statement of fact delivered with the flat finality of a court judgment. Each syllable carried the weight of absolute certainty. For a heartbeat, the bunker was utterly silent. Even the perpetual howl of the wind outside seemed to pause. Even the hum of electronics and the whisper of ventilation systems seemed to hold their breath. Colonel James Kessler's face underwent a transformation. The flush of performative anger froze mid-expression. Confusion warred with disbelief. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes searched her face for some hint of insubordination, some flicker of a lie, some crack in the absolute certainty he saw there. He found nothing but the calm, unwavering certainty of a winter sea. "What did you say?" he whispered. The parade ground voice was gone. This was the voice of a man whose entire worldview had just been challenged. "My operational mandate is independent, sir." Sarah clarified, her tone unchanged. "In the event of a Protocol Zero contingency where the station's operational integrity is compromised beyond the scope of standard command procedures, authority defaults to me." Kessler stared at her. His mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing, trying to find the flaw in her statement, the bureaucratic loophole he could exploit. But the way she spoke, the absolute confidence in her voice, the complete absence of doubt. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what authority she held and exactly how far it extended. He straightened up, his physical dominance suddenly inadequate against this quiet, unassuming woman who had just claimed to supersede his command. It was impossible. It was an insult. It violated every principle of military hierarchy he'd spent 4 decades internalizing. Insubordination, he spat, finding his footing again in righteous anger. It was familiar territory, comfortable. You are on report. I'll have you on the first transport off this mountain. We'll see what your mandate says then when you're standing in front of a review board explaining yourself. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. The conversation was over. The challenge was rejected. Order would be restored. Briefing's over, he barked at the room. Get to your posts, all of you, now. The officers dispersed with practiced efficiency, careful not to look at Sarah, careful not to look at Kessler. They had witnessed something unprecedented, something that had cracked the foundation of their carefully ordered world. The implications were too large to process in the moment, too dangerous to acknowledge. Sarah Brennan did not react. She did not protest. She did not display fear or anger or frustration. She simply turned her gaze back to her console and sat down. The data streams continued their silent, inexorable flow. She returned to her work as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a minor interruption. But her screens told a different story. Anyone who could read the complex algorithms and predictive models would have seen what she saw. The data was screaming. Numbers were aligning in patterns that spoke of disaster. Solar weather models were showing something extraordinary, something catastrophic. A coronal mass ejection, massive beyond normal parameters, heading directly toward Earth, and the clock was already counting down. Gallagher remained near the back of the room watching. He saw the way Sarah's fingers moved across her keyboard, the way her eyes tracked data with increasing intensity. He saw something else, too, the slight tightening around her mouth, the microscopic shift in posture that spoke of mounting concern. Lieutenant Holstrom, who had been stealing glances at Sarah's console for 3 days out of pure professional curiosity, could no longer contain himself. As the command center emptied, he approached her station with the cautious respect of a junior officer who recognized expertise when he saw it, even if it came from an unexpected source. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his accent carrying the faint precision of his Scandinavian heritage. "Those models you're running, those are predictive cascade scenarios, aren't they?" Sarah glanced at him. It was the first time she'd made direct eye contact with anyone other than Kessler. Holstrom felt the full weight of that gaze, the sense of being evaluated with the same clinical precision she applied to her data. "Yes," she said simply. "I've never seen algorithms structured like that. The parameters you're using for solar-wind interaction with Earth's magnetosphere, they're outside standard models." "Standard models are insufficient for this scenario." Holstrom leaned closer, studying the screens. His eyes widened. "That magnitude, if that's accurate, that's a Carrington-class event, maybe bigger." "It's accurate. Does the colonel know?" "He will, when the data makes it impossible to ignore. Ma'am, with respect, if these projections are correct, we should be implementing emergency protocols now. We should be—" "Lieutenant." Sarah interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Do you think Colonel Kessler would listen if I walked into his office right now with this data?" Holstrom opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. They both knew the answer. "The data will speak for itself," Sarah continued. "In approximately 68 hours. Until then, I'm preparing contingencies. If you want to help, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the station's tertiary cooling systems and the location of the Cold War-era copper conduit network in Section Gamma 7. The copper conduits, those haven't been used in decades. They're not even on the active schematics, which is precisely why they might be our only option when the primary and secondary systems fail. Holstrom stared at her. You're that certain the Colonel is going to make the wrong call? I'm certain that in a crisis people default to what they know. Colonel Kessler knows command through dominance. He knows protocol through rigid adherence to established procedures. What's coming isn't something established procedures can handle. So yes, Lieutenant, I'm that certain. Chief Engineer Calloway had been listening from his station nearby. He approached now, his expression troubled. At 45, he'd spent 22 years managing nuclear systems in hostile environments. He knew the difference between theoretical danger and existential threat. Dr. Brennan, he said, using her title for the first time. I pulled your credentials after you arrived. They're impressive and largely redacted, but what I could see suggests you've been involved in some of the most critical infrastructure operations in the last decade. I've done my job, Chief. 3 stations saved from catastrophic failures. 2 of them never made the news. 1 of them would have triggered an international incident if it had gone critical. Calloway paused. You're not here by accident. Someone sent you. Someone who knew something was coming. Sarah regarded him with that same clinical assessment. Do you want the truth, Chief? Always. No one sent me. I requested this assignment 3 months ago when I first identified the solar activity patterns that led to this CME. I've been tracking this event since it was just a statistical anomaly in far-side observations. I knew it would hit Earth. I knew the timing within a 48-hour window. And I knew that Station Raptor was one of 3 installations that wouldn't survive standard protocols. Calloway felt his blood run cold. 3 months. You've known for 3 months. Knowledge without authority is useless. I had to be here in position with my mandate activated when the crisis arrived. Otherwise, I'm just another analyst writing reports no one reads until after people are dead. Like your father, Gallagher said quietly. The room went silent. Sarah's head turned slowly, her gaze finding the master sergeant. For the first time, her mask of clinical detachment slipped. Just for a second, just enough for Gallagher to see the grief that lived behind her eyes. You knew him, she said. Not a question, a statement. Macedonia, 2003. Joint Signals Intelligence Operation. He told my team we had hostiles flanking from the north when every other analyst said we were clear. We followed his call. He was right. Saved 8 lives that night. Sarah nodded slowly. He had a gift for seeing patterns others missed. You have the same gift. I've been watching you. You see everything. Not everything, Sergeant. Just the things that matter. Gallagher stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Sarah could hear. Akron Station. I was on the investigation team. Peripheral role, but I read the full report. Your father warned them, gave them data projections, the complete picture. The station commander called him a coward, said civilians didn't understand the realities of command. 48 hours later, 247 people were dead. Sarah's jaw tightened. 247 souls who died because ego trumped data. And you've spent 19 years making sure it never happens again. I've spent 19 years becoming the person my father needed in that moment. Someone with the authority to make commanders listen. Someone who couldn't be dismissed as just a civilian analyst with theories and fears. Protocol Zero, Gallagher said. They created it because of Akron. They created it because my father's testimony at the inquiry was so damning, so complete, so irrefutable that the Joint Chiefs had no choice but to admit the failure was structural. Not technical, structural. The command hierarchy itself was the failure point, so they created a fail-safe, a human circuit breaker with the authority to supersede command in specific scenarios. And you're that circuit breaker. I'm one of 7. Spread across critical installations worldwide. We're ghosts. We're insurance policies no one wants to acknowledge they need. and we only activate when the unthinkable becomes inevitable. Holstrom had been listening, his face pale. "Ma'am, are you saying the unthinkable is about to happen here?" Sarah turned back to her screens. The data continued its relentless flow, numbers climbing probabilities, solidifying the future, writing itself in algorithms and projections. In 68 hours, a coronal mass ejection will strike Earth's magnetosphere. The particle density is 1.7 times 10 to the 15th joules. Our shield systems are rated for 8 times 10 to the 14th. Do the math, Lieutenant. Holstrom did the math in his head. His face went from pale to ashen. We'll be overloaded by more than double our capacity. Correct. And when those shields collapse under the surge, the feedback will channel directly into our power distribution network, which will overload the primary coolant systems for the reactor, which will trigger a cascade failure that will take us from operational to core meltdown in approximately 8 minutes. Calloway's hands were shaking. "You're certain, absolutely certain?" "I've run the simulation 47 times using 3 different modeling frameworks. The outcome is invariant. If Colonel Kessler follows standard protocols and raises shields to maximum to protect against the EMP, he will turn this station into a crater and everyone on it into casualties." "Then we tell him," Holstrom said. "We show him the data, we make him understand." Sarah's expression was sad, knowing the look of someone who had fought this battle before and knew exactly how it would end. "I told him 3 days ago, Lieutenant, in my initial briefing memo. 68 hours warning of a catastrophic solar event requiring non-standard response protocols." "Do you know what he did with that memo?" "What? He had his aide file it under analyst recommendations for review, which is military bureaucratic language for ignore until it becomes politically convenient to acknowledge. He didn't even read it." Gallagher shook his head. "He won't listen. Not to you. Not about this. He sees you as a threat to his authority, and men like Kessler would rather die than admit a threat they can't punch or shoot or command into submission." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "which is why I'm not relying on him listening. I'm relying on the data being so loud, so undeniable, so catastrophically obvious that even he can't ignore it, and by then I'll be in position to implement the only solution that has any chance of working." "Which is?" Calloway asked. Sarah's fingers danced across her keyboard. A schematic appeared on her screen complex in 3-dimensional, showing the station's infrastructure in detail that even the chief engineer hadn't seen before. "We bypass every automated system. We manually engage the tertiary coolant reservoir using a polymorphic electrical pulse that mimics the digital handshake protocol the valves require. We do it with salvaged parts copper wire and approximately 3 minutes before the reactor core goes critical. And we do it perfectly because there won't be time for a second attempt." The 3 men stared at her. "That's impossible," Calloway whispered. Sarah's eyes met his. "No, Chief. It's improbable. There's a difference. Impossible means it can't be done. Improbable means it requires perfect execution under catastrophic conditions by someone who knows exactly what they're doing." She paused. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The next 48 hours were a study in contrasts. Above the surface, life on Station Raptor continued its normal rhythms. Shifts changed. Meals were served. Reports were filed. Colonel Kessler maintained his routine of aggressive oversight and public demonstrations of command authority. But beneath the surface, in the quiet spaces between official duties, a different story was unfolding. Sarah Brennan worked at her console with unwavering focus. Her screens showed the coronal mass ejection's progress, its trajectory refined with each new data point. The timeline shifted not by much, but enough to matter. The CME was accelerating, pushed by solar wind streams that were themselves anomalous. 68 hours became 62 hours. She updated her calculations, adjusted her contingency plans, and began the delicate work of positioning herself for what was coming. Gallagher, moving with the practiced invisibility of a man who'd spent decades in special operations, left a map under her door. No note, no explanation. Just a hand-drawn schematic of the maintenance tunnel network with certain access points marked in a way that only someone with tactical training would recognize as significant. Sarah studied the map, memorized it, and burned it in the small metal waste can in her quarters. The ashes she flushed, the knowledge she kept. Holstrom and Calloway began their own preparations, quietly, carefully, isolating critical systems under the guise of routine maintenance, staging backup equipment, reviewing schematics for components that hadn't been accessed in decades. They worked in parallel, each man following the same instinct: trust the data, prepare for the worst, hope the Colonel proves them wrong. They knew he wouldn't. On the second night, Sarah accessed the maintenance tunnels using Gallagher's map. The passages were narrow, cold, lit by emergency lights that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. She moved through them like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the steel grating. Deep in the mountain, in a section of the facility that dated back to the Cold War, she found what she was looking for: the old analog monitoring station. It was a relic, a room full of equipment that predated digital computing. Oscilloscopes, strip chart recorders, mechanical calculators, tools that had monitored the skies when the threat was Soviet missiles instead of solar storms. The equipment still worked, barely, but it worked. Sarah powered up the systems, watching vacuum tubes glow to life with warm orange light. She calibrated the instruments by hand, adjusting dials and setting reference points using protocols she'd learned from her father. Protocols he'd learned from engineers who'd built these systems when reliability mattered more than convenience. The analog station couldn't match the sophistication of modern sensors. But it had one critical advantage: it couldn't be locked out by command override. It couldn't be disabled by administrative order. It existed outside the digital network, independent and immune to interference. From this room, Sarah could monitor the CME's approach even if Kessler cut her access to the main systems. She spent hours there running calculations by hand, pencil and paper, slide rules, logarithmic tables printed on yellowing pages, the mathematics of catastrophe rendered in graphite and ink, the old ways that never lied because they had no capacity for deception. The results confirmed what her digital models had shown. The CME was massive. Its interaction with Earth's magnetosphere would be violent, and Station Raptor was directly in the path of the electromagnetic pulse that would precede the particle storm. Sarah updated her timeline again. 62 hours became 58 hours. She was running out of time. On the morning of the third day since her confrontation with Kessler, the sky began to change. It was subtle at first, visible only to those who knew what to look for. The pale, washed-out blue of high-altitude sky deepened to a bruised purple around the edges. A strange, ethereal green light began to shimmer at the horizon, dancing like curtains of luminescence where no aurora should be possible. They were too far south for natural aurora. The lights should have been confined to latitudes near the Arctic Circle, but here they were visible from the Colorado Rockies, growing brighter with each passing hour. The advanced particles had arrived, the electromagnetic storm front, the precursor to the main wave. In the command center, Lieutenant Holstrom was the first to notice. He was staring at the main observatory feed when the colors intensified, shifting from green to purple to an otherworldly blue that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. "What in God's name is that?" he muttered, not quite to himself. Chief Calloway moved to the window, his expression grim. "That's not right. I've never seen anything like it, not at this latitude." Across the room at her console, Sarah Brennan spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it commanded absolute attention. It cut through the rising murmur of confusion like a blade through silk. It's a coronal mass ejection, a big one. It's hitting the magnetosphere now. What you're seeing is the particle impact. The electromagnetic pulse will arrive in 7 minutes. Colonel Kessler, who had been reviewing supply requisitions in his office, stormed back into the command center. His face was red with irritation at the disruption to his routine. "What's this nonsense?" he demanded. "Ejections are predicted weeks in advance. The space weather report was clear this morning. Normal solar activity across all bands." Sarah didn't look up from her screen. Her fingers continued their precise dance across the keyboard. "This one was occluded, sir. It originated from a sunspot on the far side of the sun, hidden from Earth-based observation. We're seeing the particle impact now. The electromagnetic pulse will arrive in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. A wave of unease swept through the room. This was not in any manual. This was not part of any drill. The men exchanged glances, their training warring with their instinct, their discipline clashing with the primal recognition of danger. "Nonsense," Kessler scoffed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Our shielding will hold. This station is rated for solar events. We've weathered them before." "Not of this magnitude," Sarah said. Her tone was clinical matter-of-fact. "The pulse will be a Carrington-level event. It will saturate the primary shielding. It will induce current in every unshielded system. It will flash boil our primary power conduits and trigger cascade failure in the reactor coolant systems." Her words painted a picture of swift, catastrophic annihilation. They hung in the air like smoke, toxic and undeniable. Kessler's military training kicked in. In the absence of understanding, default to established protocol. In the face of uncertainty, apply force. "Raise the energy shields to maximum," he bellowed, his voice regaining its parade ground authority. "Divert auxiliary power to reinforce the emitters. We'll meet this head-on." "Sir, that's a negative," Sarah said. She finally looked at him, and her voice dropped into a tone of formal command that froze every man in the room. "That action will create a feedback loop. When the pulse hits the overloaded emitters, the energy surge will channel directly into the core reactor's coolant system." She stood holding his gaze with absolute certainty. "You will turn this station into a crater, sir, and everyone on it into casualties." The command center went silent. All eyes moved between the colonel and the analyst. The hierarchy that had governed their world was suddenly irrelevant. This was not about rank. This was about survival. And the only person in the room who seemed to understand the threat was the quiet woman everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. Kessler's face went from red to purple. "I am in command here," he roared. "I will not have my orders questioned by some analyst who sits in a corner playing with computers. Chief Calloway, execute my order. Shields to maximum now." Calloway's hand hovered over his console. He looked from Kessler to Sarah. He saw rage in one and absolute chilling calm in the other. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the bunker, "I have presented you with data. I have explained the consequences. You are about to make a decision that will kill 47 people. I need you to understand that fully before you give that order." 3 minutes, she added, glancing at her screen. "The pulse arrives in 3 minutes." The lights in the bunker flickered. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the walls themselves, the sound of electronics under unbearable strain. It was the advanced particles, the leading edge of the storm, already beginning to interact with the station's systems. Men looked up at the lights, at the walls, at each other. Fear, cold and sharp, began to replace the comfortable certainty of routine. Gallagher stepped forward, placing himself between Kessler and the engineering console. "Sir," he said, his voice a low, respectful growl. "Maybe we should hear her out. Give her a chance to explain." "Get out of my way, Master Sergeant," Kessler snapped. He was beyond reason now, operating on pure ego. His authority had been challenged, his judgment questioned, and his response was to double down on the only thing he trusted, his own certainty. He pushed past Gallagher and lunged for the console himself. "If you won't do your job, I'll do it myself." His hand slammed down on the master control, engaging the protocol to divert auxiliary power to the shield emitters. On the main holographic display, a schematic of the station lit up. Red lines snaked from the auxiliary generators toward the shield emitters like arterial flow. Power level indicators spiked deep into the red zone, climbing past safety thresholds, past design limits, into territory that made Calloway's face go pale. Kessler turned to face Sarah, his chest puffed with vindication. "See," he sneered. "Problem solved. That's what real command looks like. Decisive action, not hand-wringing and computer models." Sarah watched him. Her face was a blank slate, empty of judgment, empty of emotion, but her eyes held something profound and terrible. A kind of sorrowful finality, the look of a surgeon who knows the patient is beyond saving, who must simply document the decline with clinical precision. "1 minute, sir," she said quietly. 58 seconds until the electromagnetic pulse arrives." And then, as if summoned by her words, the world ended. There was no sound at first, only light. A silent, blinding wave of pure white energy that washed over the mountain like the breath of God. For a fraction of a second, every screen in the bunker went supernova, bright, brilliant, beyond bearing, brighter than any light meant for human eyes. Then they died. Every screen, every monitor, every display. They died in a shower of sparks, circuits, frying components, melting the careful electronic infrastructure of the station, collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The overhead lights exploded. Glass rained down in glittering shards. The high-pitched whine from the walls rose to an unbearable shriek, and then cut out, plunging the room into absolute darkness and a deafening silence. For 3 heartbeats there was nothing. No light, no sound, just the shocked gasps of men who had just witnessed the impossible. Then the emergency lights flickered to life. Red and sparse, they painted the scene in hellish illumination. The air was thick with the acrid smell of fried circuits and ozone. A klaxon began to blare, a panicked, stuttering cry that spoke of systems pushed beyond failure. "Core temperature rising," a voice screamed from the engineering pit. "Coolant pumps are offline. Repeat, we have no coolant flow." Panic erupted, cold and sharp and absolute. Men who had trained for every contingency found themselves facing something no training had prepared them for. They shouted, they ran in the dark, their discipline dissolving in the face of unprecedented catastrophe. Colonel Kessler stood frozen, his face illuminated by the strobing red emergency lights. The sneer of triumph was gone, replaced by slack-jawed horror. He had done exactly what she said he would do. Every prediction, every warning, every careful explanation had been proven correct in the most catastrophic way possible. His authority, so loud and absolute moments before, evaporated into the smoke-filled air. He was just a man in the dark now. A man who had just killed everyone on the mountain through pride and ignorance and the arrogant certainty that he knew better than the data. Into this chaos, a new sound emerged. Calm, measured, purposeful. Footsteps. Sarah Brennan rose from her console. The time for observation was over. The time for stillness had passed. What remained was action, pure and focused and driven by a discipline that went deeper than fear. In the red, strobe-lit darkness she moved. Not like a person, but like a force of nature. Every step had purpose, every movement was economical. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy, no doubt. She was the only calm point in a universe of chaos. And every man in that bunker, in that moment of absolute crisis, turned toward her, like drowning men toward a life raft. Her voice cut through the panic like a surgical blade. "Kill the main breaker, now!" It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of pure, undiluted competence, the voice of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and exactly how to do it. Chief Calloway, shaken from his stupor, scrambled to obey. A heavy thud echoed through the bunker as the main power grid was physically disconnected. The screaming klaxon died. The silence that followed was heavier, more terrifying than any alarm. "Reactor core is at 70% of thermal limit," came a strained voice from the engineering pit. "Meltdown in 12 minutes. Kessler finally found his voice. It was hollow, desperate, a man grasping for the authority that had been stripped away. "Get the backup generators online. Now!" "Negative," Sarah said, already moving toward a secondary panel. "The EMP fried their ignition circuits. They're useless." Her hands were already working, pulling the cover off an older control panel. Inside was a nest of wires and relays technology from a previous generation built when reliability mattered more than elegance. Primary and secondary coolant pumps are fused. She diagnosed, her hands already moving inside the panel with practiced precision. "The digital controllers are slag. We have to bypass them and manually engage the tertiary reservoir." "That's impossible," Calloway protested. "The tertiary system is on a completely separate network. It requires a digital handshake protocol to engage. The network is down. There's no way to—" "Then we create a new way," Sarah interrupted. She pulled a multi-tool from her belt. With deft, precise movements, she began to strip wires. "We're going to build a polymorphic pulse generator using salvaged components. We're going to trick the system into thinking it's receiving the handshake protocol. And we're going to do it in the next 11 minutes. She was not asking. She was not requesting permission. She was stating what would happen with the same certainty she'd stated the consequences of Kessler's decision. And in that moment, command transferred, not through rank or protocol or official designation. It transferred because there was only one person in the bunker who knew what to do, and everyone else knew it. "I need a direct hard line to the reservoir valve control," Sarah commanded. "Lieutenant Holstrom, find me the schematics for the old copper conduits in section Gamma 7. They were installed as a physical failsafe in the original construction." "Move." Holstrom ran. For the first time since the crisis began, he had a clear order, an achievable task. It was an anchor in the storm. Sarah's hands became a blur. She was not just repairing systems, she was rewriting them, building a new nervous system for the station out of the corpse of the old one. Cannibalizing relays from 3 different dead systems, twisting wires with practiced precision, creating something that had never existed before and would only exist once. "Core temperature at 80%, the engineer reported, his voice tight with fear. 9 minutes to critical." Holstrom returned breathless, unrolling a dusty yellowed blueprint. "Section Gamma 7, ma'am. Copper conduits installed 1985 during the original Cold War construction." Sarah glanced at the blueprint for less than a second. Her mind absorbed the complex diagram, instantly processing pathways and junction points with the speed of a computer and the intuition of an artist. "There," she said, pointing to a junction box on the far side of the room. "Pry it open. 3 leads inside, red, green, black. Strip them and get them ready." 2 men jumped to the task, working with frantic energy born of desperation and hope. Sarah continued her work. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, building a circuit that existed nowhere in any manual, that violated a dozen safety protocols, that would work exactly once or not at all. This was the moment her entire life had prepared her for. Every hour of training, every simulation, every night spent studying her father's notes, understanding how he'd seen patterns in chaos, learning to trust the mathematics even when instinct screamed otherwise. She was her father's daughter, and she would not fail the way he had been failed. "Leads are ready," a voice yelled. "Core at 90%, the engineer's voice cracked. 6 minutes to meltdown." Sarah held up her improvised circuit, a mess of twisted wires and salvaged components that looked more like modern art than functional technology. "Listen very carefully," she said, her voice dropping lower, more intense. "I'm going to send a 3-phase pulse. The first 2 will prime the valve's magnetic lock. The third will engage the actuator. The timing is critical. You will connect my secondary lead to the green terminal for exactly 1.5 seconds, precisely when I tell you. No sooner, no later. Do you understand?" The man at the junction box, a young specialist whose hands were shaking, managed to nod. "I understand, ma'am." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She was not praying. She was visualizing, seeing the flow of electricity through copper and steel, hearing the response of relays and magnetic coils, feeling the timing of the system as if it were her own heartbeat. She opened her eyes. "First pulse. Now." She touched a wire to a terminal. A single large spark jumped in the darkness, bright as a camera flash. A deep groaning sound echoed from the bowels of the station, the ancient valve locks dormant for decades beginning to stir. "Second pulse! Now!" Another spark, brighter this time. The groaning became a vibration felt through the floor, through the walls, through the bones of every man present. "Core at 95%, came the terrified voice. "Containment shields are failing, we're at the edge." Sarah's eyes were fixed on a small analog meter. She'd jury-rigged its needle, quivering with the pulse of electrical current. She watched it climb, waited, watched it climb again. Calculating, timing, trusting the mathematics that never lied. The needle reached a precise calibration mark. "Connect green, now!" The specialist slammed the wire onto the terminal. For a terrible second, nothing happened. The bunker was silent except for the ragged breathing of men confronting their mortality. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat an eternity, each second a journey through fear and hope and desperate prayer. Then a sound, deep, powerful, primal, a thrumming from far below, a vibration that grew until it was felt in teeth and bones in the steel structure of the mountain itself. It was the sound of thousands of gallons of supercooled liquid nitrogen flooding the channels around the reactor core. The sound of salvation delivered through copper wire and desperate genius. On a battery-powered emergency monitor, a single line of text glowed green in the darkness. Tertiary coolant flow nominal. The temperature gauge, which had been climbing toward annihilation, paused, then began to fall. Slowly at first, then rapidly, 95%, 80%, 60%, 40%. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. Men slumped against walls. Some dropped to their knees. A few wept openly, unashamed of tears in the face of death averted. They were alive. Sarah Brennan stood examining her handiwork with a critical, dispassionate eye. She wiped a smear of grease from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her expression was neutral, professional, the look of an engineer assessing functionality rather than celebrating triumph. She had not just saved the station. She had done the impossible. She had picked a lock with lightning. She had built a solution from scraps and knowledge and the kind of discipline that came from 19 years of preparation for this exact moment. And in the red, flickering light of the ruined command center, every man looked at her with new understanding. They were not looking at an analyst anymore. They were not looking at a woman who could be dismissed or ignored or relegated to a corner console. They were looking at the person who had just single-handedly pulled them back from the edge of oblivion. They were looking at their commander. The 3 days that followed were unlike anything Station Raptor had ever experienced. The command bunker remained a tomb of broken technology lit only by emergency battery systems that cast everything in shades of red and amber. The screens were dead. The holographic displays were slag. The sophisticated digital infrastructure that had made the station a marvel of modern military engineering was reduced to charred circuits and melted components. But the station lived. The reactor core had stabilized at safe operating temperature. Life support functioned on backup systems, and the men who had come within minutes of death moved through their duties with a quiet, reverent focus that spoke of fundamental change. They watched Sarah Brennan differently now. When she walked the corridors checking systems manually with handheld diagnostic tools, men stepped aside with instinctive deference. When she spoke, even the most senior NCOs stopped what they were doing to listen. Her silence was no longer dismissed as weakness. It was understood as the mark of someone who spoke only when words mattered, who wasted nothing, not even breath. The jury-rigged tertiary cooling system she'd built from salvaged parts continued to function with improbable reliability. Chief Calloway had examined it with the wonder of a man confronting a miracle. The polymorphic pulse circuit shouldn't have worked. The timing tolerances were absurd. The salvaged components were from 3 incompatible systems. But it worked because Sarah Brennan had built it with a precision that transcended the limitations of the available materials. She had rewritten the laws of possibility through sheer competence. Lieutenant Holstrom had become her shadow, carrying tools, running calculations, asking questions with the hunger of a student who'd finally found a teacher worthy of his attention. He'd spent 4 years at MIT learning engineering theory. In 3 days with Sarah, he'd learned more about practical problem-solving under catastrophic conditions than his entire academic career had provided. On the second morning after the crisis, he found her in the reactor sublevel. She was alone, running manual diagnostics on the containment system, checking for stress fractures that might have occurred during the thermal spike. The space was cramped, lit by work lights she'd positioned with geometric precision to eliminate shadows. "Ma'am," Holstrom said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Sarah glanced up from her inspection. Her face was smudged with grease, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked exhausted. But her eyes were alert, constantly processing, always working. "Lieutenant, report. Power grid restoration is proceeding on schedule. We've bypassed the fried sections and established stable flow to critical systems. Communications are still down. The EMP wiped out our satellite uplink entirely. We're working on a hardline connection using the old fiber optic cables in the lower tunnels, but it'll take another 48 hours minimum." Sarah nodded. "Good. What about the shield emitters? Completely destroyed. The feedback surge melted the primary coils. We're looking at months for replacement parts, assuming we can even get them manufactured to the original specifications. We won't need them for a while. The CME was a singular event. Solar activity is returning to normal patterns. We have a window." Holstrom hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Ma'am, how did you know? How were you so certain about every detail, the timing, the cascade sequence, the exact failure points?" Sarah set down her diagnostic tool and looked at him directly. It was a look of such intensity that Holstrom felt his breath catch. Not threatening, not aggressive, just absolutely focused, as if he were the only thing in her universe in that moment. "I've run this simulation 47 times, Lieutenant. Different stations, different commanders, same scenario, a commander who trusts ego over data. My father died in one like this. He had the data but not the authority. 247 people died with him." "Akron Station," Holstrom said softly. "You've read about it. After you saved us, I pulled the classified report. Your father's testimony was devastating. He documented everything, every warning he gave, every time he was dismissed, every opportunity the commander had to prevent the disaster. It reads like a prosecution brief." It was a prosecution brief. It led to courts-martial, forced retirements, and the complete restructuring of how civilian technical consultants are integrated into military command structures. Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless, but Holstrom heard the grief beneath it. It also led to Protocol Zero, the fail-safe authority that gives people like me the power to supersede command when the data says command is wrong. But you didn't use that authority, not at first. You let Colonel Kessler make his mistake. Sarah's jaw tightened. It was the first crack in her clinical composure that Holstrom had seen. "I made a calculated decision, Lieutenant. I could have invoked Protocol Zero the moment I arrived. I could have taken command, implemented proper preparations, and prevented the crisis entirely. So why didn't you? Because forcing the issue would have created a different kind of failure. Half the men on this station would have refused to follow my orders. They would have seen me as a bureaucratic coup, an outsider seizing power through legal technicality. Their resistance, their skepticism, their resentment would have compromised every emergency procedure we needed to execute." She picked up her diagnostic tool again, examining a weld point on the containment vessel. "So I let the colonel make his choice. I let the crisis prove who was right. I gambled that I could save everyone even after his mistake, because dead men don't learn lessons and survivors do. That's a hell of a gamble. 73% probability of success based on my pre-positioned equipment and contingency planning. 27% that I'd fail and everyone would die anyway." Her voice dropped even lower. "I'll carry that 27% for the rest of my life." Holstrom stared at her, seeing not just the competent engineer but the human being beneath, the woman who'd made an impossible choice and would live forever with the weight of what might have happened. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think you made the right call. The station isn't just saved, it's changed. The men think differently now. They trust data. They check their assumptions. You didn't just prevent a disaster, you prevented the next one by teaching everyone here why the disaster almost happened." Sarah didn't respond. She simply nodded once and returned to her inspection. In the command center, Chief Calloway was conducting his own assessment. The main holographic table was gone, replaced by a physical situation board covered in handwritten notes and paper charts. It was a throwback to an earlier era of command when situational awareness came from grease pencils and acetate overlays rather than three-dimensional projections. He found himself preferring it. The physical act of writing information, of moving markers by hand, forced a kind of engagement that passive screen watching didn't require. You had to think about what you were documenting. You had to process it, understand it before you could represent it visually. Master Sergeant Gallagher stood beside him, updating the power distribution diagram with practiced precision. The old soldier worked in silence, his movements economical and sure. "She's something else," Calloway said quietly, not looking up from his own work. "That she is. I've been a nuclear engineer for 22 years. I've worked with some brilliant people, but I've never seen anyone do what she did. The speed of her diagnosis, the improvisation, the absolute certainty of her execution. It was like watching someone work from muscle memory on a problem they'd never actually encountered before." Gallagher smiled slightly. "Her father was the same way. I watched him redirect an entire tactical operation based on a signal pattern he'd seen for maybe 30 seconds. Saved 8 lives that night. He had this ability to see the whole picture from fragments, to extrapolate from insufficient data and be right anyway." She mentioned him, said he died on Akron Station. He did, and she spent every day since making sure his death meant something. Protocol Zero exists because of his testimony. She exists as its implementation. She's the living embodiment of her father's final lesson. Calloway set down his marker, which is that being right isn't enough, that knowledge without authority is just academic exercise, that if you're going to save lives in a crisis, you need both the competence to know what to do and the power to make people do it. She has both now. She always had both. She just waited until we were ready to accept it. The door to the command center opened. Colonel Kessler entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. His uniform was impeccable, pressed and proper, but his face carried the weight of catastrophic failure. His eyes were haunted. He'd spent the last 72 hours confined to his quarters by his own choice, not under arrest, not formally relieved, but removed from the daily operations of the station by the simple fact that no one was asking for his orders anymore. Command had transferred not through official channels but through the organic recognition that he was no longer the person anyone wanted making decisions. "Chief," Kessler said, his voice subdued. "Status report." Calloway straightened. Old habits died hard. "Sir, life support stable on backup systems. Reactor core maintaining safe temperature on tertiary cooling. Power grid partially restored. Communications still down but expected online within 2 days. No casualties. Station is damaged but operational." Kessler nodded slowly. He looked at the physical situation board, at the handwritten notes and manual tracking systems that had replaced the sophisticated technology his decision had destroyed. "Where is Dr. Brennan?" "Reactor sublevel, sir, running structural assessments." "I need to speak with her." Gallagher exchanged a glance with Calloway. "Sir, perhaps it would be better to wait until—" "I need to speak with her, Sergeant, now." There was no anger in Kessler's voice, no authority, just something that sounded like desperation or possibly the need for confession. The voice of a man who needed to face what he'd done while he still had the courage. Gallagher led him down through the maintenance levels to the reactor sublevel. The corridors were narrow here, the ceilings low. This was the working guts of the station, all exposed conduits and access panels and the constant low hum of machinery keeping critical systems alive. They found Sarah exactly where Holstrom had left her. She was on her back beneath a section of coolant piping, examining welds with a high-intensity light. Only her legs were visible, extending from beneath the massive pipes. "Dr. Brennan," Gallagher announced, "you have a visitor." Sarah slid out from beneath the pipes with practiced ease. She saw Kessler and her expression didn't change. No judgment, no satisfaction, just clinical neutrality, as if he were another system requiring assessment. She stood wiping her hands on a rag. "Colonel." Kessler struggled for words. "You were right. About everything. The CME, the cascade, the timeline, every detail." He paused. "I didn't listen. I thought experience trumped data. I was wrong. My mistake nearly killed 47 people." Sarah watched him with those winter sea eyes. "Yes, sir, it did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deal in forgiveness, Colonel. I deal in data. The data says you made a mistake under conditions of incomplete information and cognitive bias. The data also says that during the crisis, when your authority became irrelevant, you followed technical instructions with precision. You held the schematic steady. You provided light when I needed it. You contributed to the solution even after causing the problem." Kessler looked surprised. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything, sir. It's my function." "Why didn't you stop me? You had the authority, Protocol Zero. You could have invoked it before I raised the shields. You could have prevented the whole disaster." Sarah set down the rag. This was the question she'd known was coming, the one she'd been preparing to answer since the moment the crisis resolved. "Because invoking Protocol Zero to prevent a disaster creates a different kind of failure, Colonel. It creates a command structure where half the personnel believe I staged a coup, where every order I give is questioned, where the lesson isn't learned because the consequences never materialize." She paused. "Dead men don't change, sir. But men who survive their mistakes by someone else's intervention have the opportunity to become better. That's a hell of a risk to take with 47 lives. 73% probability of success based on my preparations. I ran the analysis. I accepted the risk, and I'll live with the fact that there was a 27% chance I was wrong and everyone would die anyway." Kessler studied her face. For the first time, he saw past the clinical exterior to the person beneath. He saw the weight she carried, the burden of perfect knowledge in an imperfect world. The impossible choices that came with being the person who could see disaster approaching, while others remained blind. "I've been in command for 30 years," he said quietly. "I've made thousands of decisions. Most of them worked out, some didn't. But I always believed that experience, instinct, and will were enough. That leadership was about being strong enough to make the hard calls and committed enough to see them through." "That's not wrong, sir. It's incomplete." "How so?" "Leadership without data is just well-intentioned guessing. Data without leadership is just academic exercise. You need both. The wisdom to listen and the courage to act. The humility to admit when you're wrong and the strength to implement solutions anyway." Kessler nodded slowly. "Your father, Akron Station. I read the report after this. He tried to tell his commander the same thing you told me." "He did. And that commander made the same mistake I did." "Yes, sir, except the people on Akron Station didn't have someone with Protocol Zero authority and pre-positioned contingency plans. They just died, all 247 of them, including my father." The words hung in the air, heavy with loss and legacy and the terrible mathematics of preventable tragedy. "I'm sorry," Kessler said, and he meant it. Perhaps for the first time in his career, apology came without caveat or excuse. "I'm sorry you lost your father that way. I'm sorry I nearly repeated his commander's mistake. And I'm sorry it took a near disaster for me to understand what you were trying to tell me." Sarah's expression softened fractionally. "Sir, I have a transmission ready for General Webb. Complete audio and visual log of the incident, biometric data, technical timeline, everything that happened from my arrival to crisis resolution. It transmits as soon as communications are restored." "I know. I deserve whatever comes from that." "What comes from that is the truth, Colonel. Nothing more, nothing less. The data will show your mistake and my intervention. It will show that you helped during the crisis even after your authority became irrelevant. It will show the complete picture." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked why I didn't stop you earlier. Because you came down here to face what you did instead of hiding from it. Because the man who helps fix the problem he created is not the same as the man who created the problem. The data shows growth, sir, and growth matters." Kessler stood silent for a long moment. Then slowly he drew himself to attention and rendered a formal salute. Not the perfunctory gesture of daily routine, but the full, precise salute given to superior officers and fallen heroes. Sarah returned it with equal precision. When Kessler left, Gallagher remained. He waited until the colonel's footsteps faded in the distance before speaking. "That was kind, what you said to him. It was accurate. Kindness doesn't factor into my assessments." "Bullshit, ma'am. You could have destroyed him completely. You have the data. You have the authority. Instead, you gave him a path forward. That's not just accuracy, that's mercy." Sarah picked up her diagnostic tool, preparing to slide back under the coolant pipes. "Mercy is just optimal resource allocation, Sergeant. A destroyed commander is useless. A humbled commander who learns from failure and applies those lessons to training the next generation has value. I optimized for value." Gallagher smiled. "You know, your father used to say the same kind of thing. Claimed he was just following the data, just optimizing for mission success. But I watched him with young analysts. Watched him teach them, encourage them, build their confidence. He cared, ma'am. He just hid it behind mathematics and logic." Sarah paused before sliding under the pipes. "Did he ever talk about me when you knew him?" "All the time. Carried your photo in his field kit. Showed me papers you'd written as an undergrad. Talked about how you saw patterns even he missed sometimes. How you had his gift but without his blind spots. He was proud of you, Dr. Brennan. Prouder than I've ever seen a father be." Sarah's jaw tightened. For just a moment the mask cracked. He died thinking he'd failed, thinking his warnings didn't matter, thinking the lesson wouldn't be learned. But you made sure it was learned. You made sure his death meant something. You became the solution to the problem that killed him. That's not failure, ma'am, that's legacy. Sarah nodded once, then slid back under the pipes, returning to her inspection. But Gallagher saw her wipe her eyes before she disappeared into the shadows. 48 hours later, the communications link was restored. The old fiber optic cables in the deep tunnels had survived the EMP, protected by layers of rock and obsolete shielding technology that had outlasted its modern replacements. Chief Calloway's team had spliced connections, jury-rigged interfaces, and established a narrow bandwidth connection to the outside world. The first transmission was Sarah's complete incident report, encrypted, compressed, sent directly to General Marcus Webb at Strategic Command. The response came 6 hours later, a holographic communications link request encrypted at the highest classification level, requiring the presence of all senior staff. They assembled in the command center. The physical situation board had been moved aside to make room for a portable holographic projector that Holstrom had cobbled together from surviving components. The image quality was poor, flickering and low resolution, but functional. When the link activated, General Webb's image materialized in the center of the room. He was 62 years old, with silver hair cut military short and a face that had seen every kind of crisis the modern world could produce. His expression was granite unreadable. "Colonel Kessler, Dr. Brennan, senior staff, I've reviewed the complete incident log." His voice was flat, giving nothing away. "Colonel, your report, please." Kessler stood at attention. He'd prepared for this moment, had written and rewritten his statement, had rehearsed the words until they felt like truth, even though they were strategic omissions designed to salvage what remained of his career. "Sir, we were struck by an unforeseen catastrophic solar event, an electromagnetic pulse of unprecedented magnitude. It overwhelmed our defensive systems and triggered a cascade failure in the reactor cooling network. Through coordinated team effort and decisive action, we were able to implement emergency protocols and avert core meltdown. The station sustained significant damage but remains operational with no casualties." Webb listened without interruption. When Kessler finished, the general's expression didn't change. "Interesting account, Colonel. Very interesting." He paused. "Now let's discuss what actually happened." The temperature in the command center seemed to drop. Every man present felt it, the shift from formal debriefing to something far more serious. General Webb's holographic image flickered slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on Colonel Kessler, with the intensity of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Sir, I don't understand," Kessler began. "The final data packet transmitted from Station Raptor before the EMP blackout was a complete system log." Webb interrupted. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that came from 4 decades of service and the stars on his shoulders. "It contains audio recordings from the command center's internal monitoring system, video from security cameras, biometric data from every crew member's fitness tracker, and a complete technical timeline of every system interaction for the 72 hours preceding the incident." Webb's image gestured and a secondary holographic display appeared beside him. Data streams began flowing, timestamps marking specific moments. The log shows Dr. Sarah Brennan arriving at Station Raptor 96 hours before the coronal mass ejection impact. It shows her submitting a formal briefing memo to your office detailing the projected solar event, its magnitude, its timeline, and specific recommendations for non-standard protective protocols. The display showed a document, Sarah's precise technical language outlining every detail of what would unfold. "It shows you routing that memo to your aide with instructions to file it under analyst recommendations for review," Webb continued, "which is military bureaucratic language for ignore indefinitely. The log shows you never read it, Colonel." Kessler's face went pale. Around the room, officers shifted uncomfortably. The log then shows a confrontation in the command center where you publicly questioned Dr. Brennan's purpose and function, where you demanded to know her commanding officer, where she informed you that you were speaking to her citing Protocol Zero authority. Webb's expression hardened further. It shows you dismissing this authority, threatening her with removal from the station, confining her to quarters pending verification of credentials you had no intention of verifying. The data streams continued scrolling, audio timestamps, video markers. The complete record of Kessler's decisions laid bare in unforgiving detail. And then, Colonel, it shows the electromagnetic pulse arrival. It shows you against Dr. Brennan's explicit technical warning personally overriding safety protocols to raise shield power to maximum. It shows you doing the exact thing she predicted would cause catastrophic cascade failure. The exact thing that nearly turned this station into a crater and every soul on it into a casualty statistic. Webb paused, letting the words sink in. The holographic display shifted, showing biometric data, heart rates, respiration, stress indicators. During the crisis, Dr. Brennan's heart rate never exceeded 68 beats per minute. Her respiration remained steady. Her stress biomarkers showed levels consistent with focused concentration, not panic. While you and every other officer in that bunker were experiencing physiological responses consistent with extreme fear, she was calm, working, solving the problem your decision created. The display changed again, showing a technical schematic of Sarah's improvised solution. The polymorphic pulse circuit, the tertiary cooling system activation, the precise sequence of actions that had saved 47 lives. The log shows that Dr. Brennan, using salvaged components and pre-positioned equipment, constructed a solution to a problem that your own chief engineer declared impossible. She did this with approximately 8 minutes remaining before core breach. She executed a technical procedure requiring precision measured in tenths of a second, and she succeeded. Webb's gaze moved from Kessler to Sarah. His expression shifted, granite softening into something approaching respect. Dr. Brennan, your assessment of the incident. Sarah stood. Her uniform was still stained from her work in the reactor sublevel. Her face was composed, professional. She held a tablet, but she didn't need to reference it. Every detail was already in her mind. Sir, mission success with preventable complications. Optimal outcome would have involved preemptive protocol implementation based on advance warning and technical recommendations. Acceptable outcome achieved through reactive crisis management following command decisions that created the emergency scenario. Her voice was clinical, factual, stripped of judgment or emotion. Recommendation command structure revision to ensure technical expertise is weighted appropriately in decision-making processes. Secondary recommendation. Expanded Protocol Zero training for senior officers to understand the conditions under which technical authority supersedes conventional chain of command. Casualties? Webb asked. 0, sir. Equipment damage. Primary shield emitters destroyed. Main power grid damaged. Digital control systems across multiple networks fried by electromagnetic pulse. Estimated repair timeline 6 to 8 months with full component replacement. However, station remains operationally capable on backup and improvised systems. Your assessment of Colonel Kessler's performance during the crisis. This was the moment. Every man in the room held his breath. Sarah could destroy Kessler completely. The data supported it. The authority was hers. One word from her and his career was over, not just in practice, but in official record. Sarah's eyes met Kessler's for a brief moment. Then she looked back at Webb. Colonel Kessler's initial decisions were based on incomplete understanding of the threat parameters and over-reliance on standard protocols inadequate for the scenario. However, once the crisis was undeniable, he provided material assistance during the technical intervention. He maintained order when panic threatened to compromise the solution. He followed complex technical instructions with precision despite having no background in the required engineering disciplines. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The data shows failure in the decision-making phase and competent support in the execution phase. The complete picture indicates a commander who made mistakes under conditions of uncertainty but retained the capacity to be useful once the nature of the crisis became clear. It wasn't an exoneration, but it wasn't a complete condemnation either. It was exactly what she'd promised Kessler, the truth complete and unvarnished. Webb absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his full attention back to Kessler. "Colonel James Kessler, you are hereby relieved of command of Station Raptor effective immediately. You will be transferred to Systems Analysis Training Command at Fort Meade. There you will undergo comprehensive retraining in technical decision-making, data interpretation, and integration of specialist expertise into command structures." Kessler stood rigid, his face a mask of controlled devastation. "This is not a punishment disguised as education, Colonel. This is education disguised as mercy. You are a decorated officer with 30 years of service. You have combat experience, leadership capability, and the respect of men who served under you. But you have a fatal flaw. You trust your instincts over data. You value your experience over expertise. You measure worth in volume and certainty rather than precision and humility." Webb's voice softened slightly, not in kindness, but in the recognition of shared humanity. "Dr. Brennan could have let you die, Colonel. She could have invoked Protocol Zero the moment she arrived and prevented the entire crisis. Instead, she let you make your mistake, prepared for the consequences, and saved everyone anyway. She gave you a gift, the opportunity to learn from failure while everyone survives. Most men don't get that gift. Most men just die and the lesson dies with them." Kessler's throat worked. "I understand, sir. Do you? Because I knew another commander once. Decorated, experienced, confident. He ignored a civilian analyst's warning about a containment field failure. 247 people died when Akron Station exploded. That analyst was Dr. Marcus Brennan. The woman standing in front of you is his daughter." The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. Officers who hadn't known the connection suddenly understood the weight of what had transpired. This wasn't just a crisis averted. This was history repeating itself with a different ending. "You had every chance to listen, Colonel. Dr. Brennan gave you data-time technical recommendations. You chose ego. And the only reason you're not dead, the only reason this isn't Akron Station 2.0, is because she spent 19 years making sure she had the knowledge, the authority, and the preparation to save people from commanders exactly like you." Webb let that sink in. Then his tone shifted to formal command authority. "You'll spend the next 2 years at Fort Meade learning what Dr. Brennan tried to teach you. You'll study systems analysis, you'll learn to read technical data, you'll understand the limitations of instinct and the power of mathematics. And then if you prove capable of integrating that knowledge with your command experience, you'll be reassigned to a training role. You'll teach the next generation of officers why ego is a tactical liability, why data matters, why listening to experts isn't weakness." Kessler saluted. His hand was steady despite everything. "Understood, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me, Colonel. Thank Dr. Brennan. She's the one who gave you the data point showing you helped during the crisis. Without that, you'd be facing a court-martial instead of a classroom." Webb's attention shifted fully to Sarah now. The granite expression softened into something approaching warmth, though warmth filtered through 4 decades of military discipline. "Dr. Sarah Brennan, your Protocol Zero designation is hereby converted to permanent command authority for Station Raptor. This is a battlefield commission with full rank and authority. The Joint Chiefs have reviewed the incident log and unanimously approved the conversion." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the weight of responsibility settling onto shoulders already accustomed to burden. "Sir, I need to note that I'm not a line officer. I don't have conventional command training or experience in personnel management. You just saved 47 lives using a multi-tool and some wire while the reactor core was 8 minutes from critical. I'd say you're qualified." Webb's voice carried a hint of dry humor. "Dr. Brennan, I served with your father on the Akron Investigation Board. I read his testimony. I watched him present data that proved beyond any doubt that the disaster was preventable, that every death was unnecessary, that Ego killed 247 people as surely as the explosion did." His voice grew quieter, more personal. His testimony led to the creation of Protocol Zero. The Joint Chiefs decided that if we couldn't fix human nature, we could at least build a fail-safe. We could identify people with your father's gift for seeing patterns and give them the authority he never had. We could make sure the next Marcus Brennan didn't die trying to convince a commander to listen. Sarah's composure cracked just fractionally. Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "Your father would be proud, Dr. Brennan. He saved lives through his death by creating the system that saved yours, and you honored his memory by proving the system works. Protocol Zero isn't theoretical anymore. It's validated. You're the proof of concept." Webb came to attention and rendered a formal salute through the holographic connection. It was slow, precise, weighted with significance. Every officer in the command center snapped to attention and saluted in unison. The sound of boots coming together, of bodies moving in synchronized respect, echoed through the damaged bunker. Sarah returned the salute. Her hand was steady, her posture perfect. But those who knew her saw the emotion she carried, the weight of legacy and loss and vindication, all compressed into a single moment of military protocol. When the salutes were complete, Webb's expression shifted back to business. "Station Raptor remains a critical asset in our early warning network. Your priority is to restore operational capability while maintaining safety standards. You have full authority to requisition equipment, personnel, and expertise as needed. Colonel Kessler will remain on station for 72 hours to ensure smooth transition, then transfer out. Any questions?" "No, sir. Orders understood." "Then I'll leave you to your work, Commander Brennan. Webb out." The holographic connection terminated. The command center fell silent except for the ever-present hum of backup systems and the whisper of ventilation. Sarah stood motionless for a moment, processing. Then she turned to face the assembled officers. Every eye was on her, not with the skepticism that had greeted her arrival, but with something approaching reverence. These men had watched her save them. They'd seen competence in its purest form, and now they waited to see what she would do with the authority that had been formalized. "Dismissed," she said quietly. "Return to your posts. Chief Calloway, I need a full damage assessment on my desk in 3 hours. Lieutenant Holstrom, continue work on the communications restoration. Master Sergeant Gallagher, inventory our spare parts and create a requisition list for critical components." The men dispersed with practiced efficiency. Orders, purpose, the familiar rhythm of military structure. But now the structure had a different center, a different voice issuing the commands. Kessler remained. He and Sarah stood alone in the center of the damaged command center, surrounded by the evidence of failure and salvation. "I meant what I said to the general," Sarah told him. "You helped during the crisis. That matters." "Does it? I created the crisis in the first place. You made a decision based on incomplete information and cognitive bias. You're not the first commander to do that. You won't be the last. But you're one of the few who survived to learn from it." Kessler looked around the ruined command center, at the melted screens, at the jury-rigged systems, at the physical situation board that had replaced sophisticated technology. "I've been in command for 30 years. I thought I knew what leadership meant. Strength, decisiveness, trusting your gut, making the hard calls and standing by them." "Those things matter," Sarah said, "but they're incomplete without humility. without the recognition that your gut can be wrong, that hard calls need to be based on hard data, that standing by decisions that are killing people isn't courage, it's suicide. Your father tried to tell his commander that. He did, and his commander chose pride, and everyone died. Sarah's voice was quiet but carried the weight of old grief. You chose pride too, Colonel. The only difference is I was prepared for it. I spent 19 years becoming the person who could save everyone despite a commander's pride. I'm sorry for what happened to your father, for nearly repeating his commander's mistake, for not listening when you tried to warn me. Apology noted. But what matters isn't apology, it's application. You're going to Fort Meade. You're going to learn systems analysis and data interpretation and how to integrate technical expertise into command decisions. And then you're going to teach the next generation why what happened here almost happened. Sarah stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with absolute focus. You're going to tell them about the analyst who warned you, the data you ignored, the crisis you created, and the 8 minutes you spent watching someone else save everyone from your mistake. You're going to make it personal, make it real, make them understand that ego kills. I will. I promise you that. Good, because your redemption isn't in apology, Colonel. It's in making sure the next commander doesn't need to be saved from himself. Kessler nodded slowly. Then, surprising both of them, he extended his hand. Sarah looked at it for a moment. Then she clasped it, not with warmth, but with the professional acknowledgement of two people who'd survived something catastrophic and emerged changed. When Kessler finally left the command center, Sarah remained. She stood before the physical situation board, studying the handwritten notes and power distribution diagrams. The station was damaged but alive, broken but functional, changed but operational, just like her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn photograph of her father. In the amber emergency lighting, his face seemed to smile at her, proud, understanding, at peace. We did it, Dad, she whispered to the empty room. We proved the system works. We made sure the lesson was learned. She tucked the photo away and turned back to her work. There was still much to do. Systems to restore, personnel to train, a culture to transform. But for the first time in 19 years, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. The legacy was secure, the mission was accomplished. And somewhere in the silence between the data points, she felt her father's approval. Over the next 2 weeks, Station Raptor transformed. Not in structure, the damaged systems remained damaged, awaiting replacement parts that would take months to arrive, but in culture. The change was organic, spreading through the crew like a new way of thinking, a different approach to the fundamental question of how decisions should be made. Morning briefings became collaborative sessions. Sarah didn't dominate the room the way Kessler had. She facilitated. She asked questions. She listened to reports with complete attention, her eyes tracking not just the words, but the confidence or uncertainty behind them. When Calloway presented repair timelines, Sarah asked about assumptions and risk factors, not challenging his expertise but strengthening his reasoning. When specialists brought concerns, she gave them complete attention. She created a culture where observations had value, where data mattered more than rank. When Lieutenant Holstrom proposed a modification to the power distribution network, she didn't approve it immediately. She had him present the data to the full staff, explain his calculations, defend his projections. Not to humiliate him, but to teach him how to build consensus through technical excellence rather than rank. Lieutenant, walk us through your load balancing algorithm. Why did you choose a dynamic distribution model rather than static allocation? Holstrom stood, pulling up his presentation. Ma'am, static allocation assumes constant load across all systems, but our usage patterns show significant variance based on time of day and operational status. A dynamic model adjusts in real time, reducing stress on individual grid segments by up to 37%. What's the failure mode if the dynamic controller glitches? The system defaults to static allocation based on the last stable configuration. We don't lose power, we just lose the optimization benefit until the controller is reset. And the reset procedure. Manual intervention required, approximately 10 minutes to diagnose and reset. So in a crisis scenario where we need maximum power efficiency, we're dependent on a controller that could fail and require manual intervention. Holstrom hesitated. Yes, ma'am. I hadn't considered that specific scenario. What if we implemented a hybrid approach, dynamic optimization during normal operations, but with automatic fallback to a pre-calculated high-efficiency static allocation during crisis protocols? Best of both worlds. Holstrom's eyes lit up. That would work. I'd need to design the high-efficiency static profile, but it's absolutely feasible. Then do that. Present the revised design at tomorrow's briefing. Good work, Lieutenant. The exchange was revealing. Sarah didn't shut down his idea. She didn't claim credit for the improvement. She identified a gap in his analysis and guided him to a better solution, letting him own the revised design. It was teaching through Socratic method, building competence rather than demonstrating superiority. The officers watched these interactions with growing understanding. This was what command looked like when ego was removed from the equation. It was collaborative. It was educational. It was focused entirely on optimal outcomes rather than personal validation. When junior specialists brought concerns about equipment performance, she gave them her complete attention. She took their observations seriously, integrated them into her situational awareness. She made them feel heard in ways they'd never experienced under conventional command. Junior specialists brought concerns about equipment performance. Sarah gave them complete attention. A young airman detected pump vibration others missed, preventing the next crisis. She turned observations into station-wide improvements. The physical changes were subtle but meaningful. Someone had put up a sign near the entrance to the command center. Hand-lettered on salvaged plastic, "Check your ego at the console." It became a station motto, a reminder. A cultural touchstone that summed up everything that had changed. Sarah had never ordered it created, never endorsed it officially, but she left it there, visible to everyone who entered the command center. Holstrom found himself teaching evening classes on predictive analysis to junior officers and senior NCOs. Men who'd spent careers measuring worth in physical capability now sat in a converted storage room learning probability theory and data modeling. And they were hungry for it, recognizing that the world had changed, that threats now came in forms that couldn't be punched or shot, that survival required new skills. The first class had 12 attendees. By the second week, that number had grown to 34. By the third week, they'd had to move to a larger space. Holstrom taught evening classes on predictive analysis. Attendance grew from 12 to 34. He explained how Sarah identified the CME 3 months early by seeing patterns in micro-anomalies others dismissed. The crew was hungry to learn. Sarah attended these sessions when her duties allowed, not as commander but as participant. She'd sit in the back, listen to Holstrom teach, occasionally offer clarifications or alternative approaches. Her presence validated the importance of what they were learning. During one session on cognitive bias, Holstrom asked her to share her experience with the CME crisis. Sarah stood reluctantly. Public speaking wasn't her strength, but she recognized the teaching opportunity. Cognitive bias is the enemy of accurate analysis, she began. During the CME crisis, Colonel Kessler exhibited multiple biases that led to his decision-making failure. First, confirmation bias. He believed the station's defenses were adequate, so he interpreted my data as overcautious rather than accurate. Second, authority bias. He valued his own experience over my technical expertise because he outranked me. Third, status quo bias. He defaulted to standard protocols because changing them felt risky. She paused. But here's the important part: I exhibited biases too. I had outcome bias. I knew what would happen, so I judged his decisions as wrong before they failed. I had hindsight bias. Looking back, his mistakes seem obvious. But in the moment, with limited information, his choices felt logical to him. The point isn't to eliminate bias. That's impossible. The point is to recognize it, account for it, and build systems that compensate for it. That's why we use data. That's why we check our assumptions. That's why we create cultures where junior airmen can question senior officers without fear. She sat down. The room was silent, processing. Then Gallagher spoke from the back. "Ma'am, if you knew Kessler was going to make the wrong call, why didn't you stop him?" It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but hadn't dared. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Because stopping him would have created a different kind of failure. Half the station would have seen me as a bureaucrat overriding a decorated combat officer. Trust would have been broken. When the next crisis came, people would have questioned my authority, resented my decisions, maybe even sabotaged my orders out of loyalty to Kessler. So you let the crisis happen. I let the data speak. I prepared contingencies, and I gambled that I could save everyone even after his mistake. It was a calculated risk with a 73% success probability. And the 27%? Sarah's eyes were distant. I carry that 27% every day. I always will. But the alternative was creating a command structure doomed to fail the next time. Sometimes the best decision is the one that hurts now, but prevents greater harm later. The room was quiet. They were seeing Sarah not as an infallible technician, but as a human being who made impossible choices and lived with the weight of them. It made her more real, more trustworthy, more worth following. In the mess hall, conversations shifted. Where once the talk had been sports and military gossip, now men debated technical journals. They discussed system vulnerabilities. They proposed theoretical solutions to hypothetical problems. The entire intellectual climate of the station had elevated. Two specialists were arguing over coffee about the optimal algorithm for power distribution. A sergeant was reading a paper on predictive maintenance models. 3 junior officers were collaborating on a proposal to improve the station's water reclamation efficiency. Gallagher watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He'd seen a lot in 42 years of service. He'd seen good commanders and bad ones. He'd seen units that functioned like machines and units that barely held together. But he'd never seen a transformation like this. Never seen a culture change so completely in such a short time. He found Sarah one evening in the observation deck. She stood at the reinforced window looking out at the mountain peaks, silhouetted against a spectacular sunset. The sky was clear now, no trace of the aurora that had heralded the electromagnetic storm. "Commander," he said quietly, announcing his presence. "Sergeant." She didn't turn, continuing to gaze at the mountains. "The men are different. You've changed them." "They changed themselves. I just gave them permission." "Don't sell yourself short. What you've built here in 2 weeks, most commanders take years to create that kind of culture, if they ever manage it at all." Sarah finally turned to face him. In the fading light, she looked younger than her 35 years, but her eyes carried depths of experience that had nothing to do with age. "My father used to say that every system has a natural state it wants to return to. You can force it into different configurations temporarily, but unless you change the fundamental parameters, it'll snap back to equilibrium as soon as you stop applying pressure. You're changing the fundamental parameters." "I'm trying to." Kessler's command style was pressure-based, maintain control through constant force. The moment he relaxed, the system would have degraded. What I'm building is different. I'm trying to make data-driven decision-making the natural equilibrium state. Make it feel normal to check assumptions, natural to trust mathematics over instinct, comfortable to admit uncertainty. It's working. I've never seen NCOs voluntarily attending classes on probability theory. Sarah smiled slightly, a rare crack in her professional composure. That's Holstrom's doing. He's a natural teacher. He makes complex concepts accessible without dumbing them down. He learned that from you. He learned it from necessity. When I was building the tertiary cooling system bypass, I had 8 minutes to teach him temporal electrical engineering well enough that he could execute a precision timing task with zero margin for error. That kind of teaching happens when failure means everyone dies. Gallagher nodded. Your father would be proud of what you've built here. Would he? Sarah's voice carried uncertainty, a rare glimpse of the doubt she usually kept locked away. I let Kessler make his mistake. I gambled with 47 lives to make a point. Is that something to be proud of? You saved 47 lives when everyone else had given up hope. You did it with scraps and knowledge and the kind of discipline that comes from dedicating your entire adult life to making sure your father's death meant something. Yes, Dr. Brennan, he would be proud. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph creased and worn from being carried for years. She held it out to Gallagher. The photo showed a man in his 40s standing in front of a bank of computer servers. He had Sarah's eyes, that same intensity of focus. He was smiling, caught in a moment of joy at solving some complex problem. Macedonia, 2003, Gallagher said, recognizing the background. That's from the signals facility where we worked together. You took this photo. He sent it to me with a letter explaining how he'd helped save your team, how seeing patterns in noise could mean the difference between life and death, how the work mattered even when no one acknowledged it. I remember taking that picture. He'd just finished explaining to our commander why the enemy radio traffic patterns indicated a flanking maneuver. The commander didn't want to believe it would have meant repositioning the entire defensive line. Your father just kept presenting the data calmly, patiently, until the mathematics became undeniable. Did the commander listen? Eventually. Grudgingly. Your father was right, of course. We repositioned. The enemy hit empty positions instead of our actual defensive line. 8 lives saved, maybe more. Gallagher handed back the photo. Your father had a gift for patience, for making people see the truth without making them feel stupid for not seeing it themselves. I don't have that gift. I'm not patient like he was. No, you're not. You're something different. You're the version of your father that has authority, that has power, that doesn't need to convince, just needs to command. But you're learning his patience. I see it in how you teach, how you interact with the junior officers. You're becoming a hybrid, your father's insight combined with the authority he never had. Sarah tucked the photo back into her pocket. There's something else, something in the data that doesn't fit the pattern. Her tone shifted, becoming more focused. Gallagher recognized it immediately. This was Sarah in analysis mode, seeing something others missed. What kind of something? During the crisis, when I was monitoring the station's systems, I noticed anomalies in our deep space satellite network. At first, I thought it was just EMP damage, but the pattern doesn't match electromagnetic interference. It's too structured, too deliberate. She pulled out a tablet, calling up data streams. Look at this. Signal degradation across 47 satellites over 72 hours, not random. Following a Fibonacci sequence. Gallagher studied the data. He didn't have Sarah's gift for pattern recognition, but even he could see it wasn't natural. That's algorithmic. Exactly, and there's more. I cross-referenced with classified archives, found a similar incident in 1997. Designated anomaly Sigma 7. Brief occurrence covered up, minimal documentation, but the pattern matches. The same Fibonacci sequence, the same satellite degradation profile. What was the conclusion in 1997? There wasn't one. The file just notes that the anomaly ceased after 36 hours with no explanation. And this notation predicted recurrence interval 9 years. Gallagher did the math. 1997 plus 9 years is 2006, then 2015, then 2024. Sarah finished. We're in the recurrence window, and this time, instead of just observing the pattern, I've analyzed it. The Fibonacci sequence isn't random noise. It's pointing to something, specific coordinates in deep space. You think someone's trying to communicate? I think something is testing our detection capabilities, probing our sensor network, learning what we can see and what we can't, whether it's human artificial intelligence or something else entirely. She trailed off, her gaze distant. What are you going to do? What I always do, Sergeant. I'm going to gather data. I'm going to analyze patterns. I'm going to prepare for possibilities no one else is considering. Because that's my function. That's what my father taught me. Listen to the silence. That's where truth hides. 3 days later, at 400 hours, Sarah called an emergency briefing. The senior staff assembled in the command center, bleary-eyed but alert. When Sarah called emergency briefings, there was always a reason. She activated the portable holographic projector displaying the satellite network data she'd shown Gallagher. But now there was more. New analysis. Deeper patterns. Gentlemen, I need to brief you on a developing situation. For the past 10 days, I've been tracking signal anomalies in our deep space early warning network. What I initially attributed to EMP damage is actually something far more significant. She walked them through the data, the Fibonacci sequence, the satellite degradation pattern, the historical precedent from 1997, the 9-year recurrence interval. Last night, I completed a comprehensive analysis of the signal patterns. The Fibonacci sequence correlates directly to spatial coordinates. When mapped three-dimensionally, the sequence points to a specific location approximately 47 light-years from Earth. Holstrom leaned forward. Ma'am, are you saying this is a directed signal from deep space? I'm saying the pattern is non-random and correlates to spatial positioning in ways that natural phenomena don't produce, whether it's a signal, a test, or something we don't have terminology for yet remains to be determined. Calloway's face was pale. This is first contact scenario territory. That's one hypothesis. Others include advanced artificial intelligence testing foreign quantum computing systems, atmospheric interaction phenomena we don't understand, or classified programs I'm not read into. I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm presenting data and preparing responses. What kind of responses? Gallagher asked. Sarah's fingers danced across her tablet. A new display appeared showing Station Raptor's sensor array reconfigured in ways none of them had seen before. We're going to modify our early warning sensors to focus on the coordinates the pattern indicates. We're going to monitor across the full electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to gather every scrap of data available and analyze it without preconceptions. And if we detect something, Holstrom asked, then we'll have information no one else has. We'll know something about the universe that was hidden before, and we'll make decisions based on data rather than fear or assumption. She looked at each of them in turn. This station was nearly destroyed because a commander ignored data and trusted his gut. We're not making that mistake again. Whatever's out there, whatever this pattern represents, we're going to face it with open eyes and clear minds. We're going to listen, we're going to analyze, and we're going to be ready. The men nodded. They'd learned to trust her judgment, to value data over instinct. If Sarah Brennan said there was something in the deep space signals worth investigating, then there was. Holstrom, your lead on sensor reconfiguration. Calloway, I need power allocation analysis to ensure we can run continuous monitoring without compromising station systems. Gallagher, coordinate with intelligence services. See if anyone else is tracking similar patterns. Orders given. Purpose established. The meeting dissolved into coordinated action. Sarah remained at the holographic display studying the coordinates that the Fibonacci sequence indicated. Somewhere out there 47 light-years away, something existed that was trying to make itself known, or test humanity's capability, or communicate in ways humans hadn't learned to understand yet. She thought about her father, about how he'd spent his life finding patterns in noise-hearing signals in science, about how his gift had saved lives when people listened and cost lives when they didn't. She was carrying on his work now, not just preventing disasters through Protocol Zero authority, but pushing into new territory, asking questions no one else was asking, seeing patterns no one else could see. The universe was stranger than anyone thought. The data proved it. And Sarah Brennan, her father's daughter, would be the one to understand what the strangeness meant. She opened her personal log, the one she'd kept since the day her father died, the one where she recorded thoughts too personal for official reports. Station Raptor Day 23 of Command. Dad, I understand now what you were trying to do at Akron. You weren't challenging authority, you were honoring a deeper authority, the truth, the data, the patterns that don't lie even when people want them to. I learned something here. Having data isn't enough. Having authority isn't enough. You need both. And you need the wisdom to know when to force the issue and when to let the crisis teach the lesson. I let Kessler make his mistake. 73% of me says that was optimal. 27% says I gambled with lives. I'll carry that 27% forever. But the station's different now. The men trust data. They check assumptions. They listen to the silence. That's your legacy, Dad. Not just Protocol Zero, not just the authority to supersede command, but the culture of intellectual humility, the recognition that ego is the enemy of truth, that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one worth listening to. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. There's something new, something in the data that shouldn't be there, a pattern pointing to the stars. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm going to find out, using everything you taught me, every lesson about seeing the invisible, every technique for finding signal in noise. Thank you for the tools, thank you for the example, thank you for dying in a way that created the system that saved lives. Your death wasn't wasted, Dad. It mattered. It changed everything. She closed the log and returned to the sensor data. The Fibonacci sequence pulsed on her screen, each number a breadcrumb leading towards something unknown. Over the next 72 hours, the sensor modifications took shape. Holstrom's team worked around the clock, realigning satellite dishes, recalibrating receivers, expanding bandwidth allocation. It was delicate work requiring precision and creativity in equal measure. Sarah supervised personally, not because she didn't trust them, but because the work fascinated her. This was exploration. This was discovery. This was the kind of problem her father had lived for. On the third day, as the final calibrations were being completed, Calloway approached her with a concern. "Ma'am, we have a power allocation issue. Running continuous deep space monitoring at this intensity will drain our backup systems faster than anticipated. We'll need to reduce power to non-essential areas." Define non-essential. Crew quarters, heating, mess hall equipment, recreational facilities. We can maintain life support and critical operations, but comfort levels will drop. Sarah considered. This was a test of priorities, of leadership, of whether she'd fall into the same trap Kessler had, making unilateral decisions without consulting those affected. Call an all-hands meeting. Crew needs to understand what we're doing and why. They need to consent to the discomfort, not just endure orders. 2 hours later, the entire station crew assembled in the largest available space, the equipment bay. Sarah stood on a maintenance platform so everyone could see her. 2 weeks ago, this station nearly died because one person made decisions without listening to data or consulting expertise. I'm not going to repeat that mistake. So I'm going to explain what we're doing, why it matters, and what it's going to cost. Then you're going to help me decide if it's worth it. She laid out the anomaly Sigma-7 data, the Fibonacci sequence, the 9-year recurrence pattern, the coordinates pointing to deep space. She didn't dumb it down. She didn't hide uncertainty. She presented the complete picture. We don't know what this is. It might be nothing. It might be everything. But it's a pattern that shouldn't exist, and patterns like that demand investigation. To investigate properly, we need to redirect significant power to our sensor array. That means reducing power to crew comfort systems, colder quarters, limited hot meals, no recreational power use. She paused. I can order this. I have the authority, but I'd rather have your consent, because this isn't about defending the station or maintaining critical operations. This is about pure research, about understanding something we don't understand yet. That's valuable, but it's not survival. So I'm asking, is it worth being cold and uncomfortable for a few weeks to potentially discover something extraordinary? Silence. Then a voice from the back, Airman Patterson, the one who detected the pump vibration. Ma'am, you saved all our lives. If you think this is important, that's good enough for me. Another voice, a sergeant. We've gotten soft anyway. A little discomfort will remind us we're not on a vacation resort. Laughter, agreement rippling through the assembly. Holstrom spoke up. Ma'am, can we help accelerate the research so we minimize discomfort duration? Sarah smiled. Lieutenant, I was hoping you'd ask. I'm creating research teams. Anyone interested in learning deep space signal analysis, see Lieutenant Holstrom after this meeting. Anyone with electrical engineering background, see Chief Calloway about optimizing power distribution. Anyone who just wants to help, see Master Sergeant Gallagher. The meeting dissolved into enthusiastic chaos. Men volunteering for research teams, engineers proposing power-saving innovations, the entire crew energized not by orders but by shared purpose. Gallagher approached Sarah as the bay emptied. That was well played, ma'am. You turned a sacrifice into an adventure. I told them the truth and let them choose. That's not manipulation, Sergeant. That's respect. Kessler never would have done that. I know. That's why he's not here anymore. The sensor array went live at 2300 hours on day 25 of Sarah's command. The modifications were complete. The power was allocated. The crew was prepared. Sarah sat at the primary monitoring console, Holstrom at her side. Calloway manned the power management station. Gallagher coordinated the expanded crew of volunteer researchers, many of whom had never done signal analysis before but were eager to learn. Initiating deep space scan, Holstrom announced. Focusing on coordinates derived from Fibonacci sequence. Full spectrum analysis across all available wavelengths. The data began flowing. At first, nothing unusual, just the cosmic background noise that filled every corner of the universe. Radio emissions from distant stars, microwave echoes from the Big Bang, the electromagnetic conversation of a living cosmos. Then at hour 3, something changed. Ma'am. Holstrom's voice was tight. I'm getting a return signal, extremely faint, but it's there, and it's structured. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the data waterfall. There, a pattern within the noise, repeating, organized, deliberate. Can you isolate it? Working on it. It's buried deep. Someone or something is using very low power or is very far away. Or doesn't want to be easily detected, Sarah added. Holstrom applied filtering algorithms, stripping away cosmic background, isolating the signal. As the pattern emerged, his hands stopped moving. Ma'am, this is the Fibonacci sequence, in reverse, like an echo, like a response. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. For the first time in weeks, genuine surprise cut through her clinical composure. Someone's answering us. Or something. They worked through the night. The signal was faint, requiring enormous computational power to extract from background noise. But it was real. It was there, and it was unquestionably artificial. By dawn, they had enough data to analyze structure. The Fibonacci sequence wasn't just random numbers. It was encoding something. Information. Mathematical relationships. Possibly even a message. Sarah called another emergency briefing. The senior staff assembled exhausted but excited. Even the volunteer researchers crowded into the command center wanting to witness history. We have confirmed detection of an artificial signal from coordinates 47 light-years distant, Sarah announced. The signal structure suggests intelligence. Whether human, artificial, or other remains unknown, but this is not natural phenomenon. This is communication. The room erupted in excited murmurs, questions, speculation. Sarah raised her hand. Silence fell. Here's what we know. The signal is weak, suggesting either low transmission power or significant distance beyond 47 light-years. The Fibonacci encoding is mathematical universal, not tied to any human language. The recurrence every 9 years suggests either automated transmission or deliberate periodic contact. What do we do? Holstrom asked. We listen, we analyze, we learn, and we report our findings through appropriate channels. This is beyond Station Raptor's mandate. This is a strategic command decision. Are we going to respond? Someone asked. Sarah considered. That's not my call to make. We're early warning, not first contact, but if authorized, yes. We have the capability to transmit on the same frequency with significantly more power than we're using to receive. She looked around the room, at the tired, excited faces, at the wonder in their eyes. This was what her father had lived for, the moment when data revealed something unprecedented, when patterns pointed to truths no one had suspected. Whatever this is, we found it because we were listening, because we trusted anomalies instead of dismissing them, because we created a culture where observations matter and data is respected. This discovery isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who helped build that culture, to everyone who chose discomfort to pursue knowledge, to everyone who believed understanding mattered. She paused, and to my father, who taught me to listen to the silence, because that's where truth hides. The report to Strategic Command was comprehensive. 300 pages of data analysis, signal specifications, comparative analysis with the 1997 Sigma 7 incident, recommendations for response protocols. General Webb's response came 72 hours later, another holographic conference, but this time he wasn't alone. The screen split showing multiple faces, scientists, intelligence officers, strategic planners. Dr. Brennan, Webb began, your discovery has created quite a stir at the highest levels. The Joint Chiefs have been briefed. The President has been informed. What you've found may be the most significant scientific discovery in human history. Sarah remained impassive. Or it could be a classified human technology I'm not read into. I'm presenting data, not conclusions. A woman in civilian clothes spoke. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, director of the SETI Institute. Dr. Brennan, I've analyzed your data. This is not human technology. The transmission characteristics, the encoding methodology, the apparent origin point, none of it matches any known terrestrial or orbital system. Then what is it? We don't know. That's why we need you to continue monitoring. And with your permission, we'd like to establish a dedicated research team at Station Raptor. Full funding, full personnel support. We're designating your facility as primary contact station for this phenomenon. Sarah glanced at her crew, at Holstrom's eager expression, at Calloway's excitement, at Gallagher's proud smile. On one condition, Sarah said, which is, my crew stays involved. This isn't something you fly in specialists to take over. The people who found this pattern deserve to study it. I'll accept support personnel, equipment upgrades, expanded capabilities. But the core research team is the people in this room. Dr. Reyes smiled. Dr. Brennan, I wouldn't have it any other way. You've built something special there. A team that trusts data over ego, that values observation over assumption. That's exactly the mindset we need for first contact scenarios. Webb spoke again. Commander Brennan, you've done more than save a station and make a discovery. You've proven that Protocol Zero works, that the culture it creates produces results conventional command structures miss. The Joint Chiefs are discussing expanding the program. More Protocol Zero designees, more stations operating under your model. Sarah felt the weight of that, her father's legacy spreading, the lesson of Akron being learned finally at institutional scale. I'm honored, sir, and I'll support that expansion however I can. Good, because we're going to need you to train the next generation of Protocol Zero commanders. But that's a conversation for later. For now, keep listening, keep learning, and keep me informed of any developments. The connection terminated. The command center erupted in celebration. They'd gone from near disaster to making history in less than a month. It was almost too much to process. Sarah didn't celebrate. She returned to her console, to the data, to the signal that pulsed from 47 light-years away, patient and persistent. Gallagher found her there an hour later. The command center had emptied. The crew had gone to spread the news, to call families groundside to share the excitement. But Sarah remained, working, analyzing, listening. You should be celebrating, ma'am. I am, in my own way. Gallagher sat beside her. Your father would be beyond proud, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become. Sarah pulled out the worn photograph, looked at her father's smile. I spent 19 years preparing to save people from disasters like Akron, building the skills, earning the authority, positioning myself to prevent the next tragedy. She traced her father's face with one finger. I never thought about what comes after, about what you do when the mission succeeds, when the lesson is learned, when the system works. You keep going, you keep improving, you keep pushing into new territory. Is that what this is, the signal from the stars? Maybe. Or maybe it's the universe's way of saying your father's work matters beyond what either of you imagined. He taught you to listen, you listened, and you heard something no one else could hear. Sarah closed her eyes. She could almost feel her father's presence, his approval, his pride, his joy at the discovery they'd made. I miss him, she said quietly. Every day I wish he could be here for this. He is here, ma'am. In every lesson you teach, in every decision you make, in every pattern you recognize. He's here because you carry him with you. Sarah opened her eyes, looked at the data flowing across her screen, the Fibonacci sequence pulsing from the depths of space. A message, a greeting, a question. She thought about her father dying on Akron Station, about the 247 people who died with him, about the system created in response to that tragedy, about Protocol Zero, about her. She thought about Kessler learning humility at Fort Meade, about the officers who'd be trained in the new culture, about stations across the globe that might adopt the check your ego at the console philosophy. She thought about the signal, about what it might mean, about the questions it raised, about the future it promised, and she realized her father's death hadn't been wasted. It had started a chain of events that led here, to this moment, to this discovery, to a culture that valued truth over ego data, over intuition, listening over commanding. Sarah spoke quietly to the empty command center, but her words carried the weight of absolute conviction. I'm listening. The sensors hummed, the data flowed, the patterns emerged, and somewhere 47 light-years away, something waited to be understood. Outside, the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains. The sky was clear and brilliant, no trace of the electromagnetic storm that had nearly destroyed them. Station Raptor stood sentinel on its peak, damaged but functioning, changed but operational. Sarah Brennan sat at her console, her father's photograph beside her keyboard. She worked in the pre-dawn quiet, listening to what the universe was trying to say. watching for patterns that others couldn't see, preparing for possibilities that hadn't been named yet. The legacy was secure, the mission continued, and the silence, as her father had taught her, still held truths waiting to be discovered. She smiled, and she listened, and she